You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast, exposing the struggles and celebrating the successes in the life of coaches who are action takers and creating authentic impact in today's world. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your reach, or exploding your impact, you're in the right place right now. Stay tuned and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Now, here are your hosts of the Coach's Journey podcast.
All right. What's up, Coaches Nation? Excited to see you for another beautiful, glorious week in 2022. I'm Dr. Sherry Flewellen with our co-host, Faisal Ansan.
Hello.
That is our totally cheesy background cheering section. We do not have a special guest today, except for the two of us, and we are going to talk about an extremely common set of questions that people that are interested in getting into coaching have. And so we are just going to explore all of that today. You are not going to want to miss this. If you are thinking about coaching, this is going to be extremely valuable. If you are already a coach, this is also going to be valuable because we might talk about things that you had not figured out yet, or you have not made a decision on, or maybe you haven't even thought about. So today is going to be a great exploration into pivoting into coaching. So first, we're going to jump into our wins, as we always do. Faisal, tell us about an amazing win or two that you've had this week.
I think a win that I had a great session with somebody from our community, and it's a very different coaching model than what I'm a lot of times used to being coached on. And I think that's the experience of that was very powerful, because a lot of times when we hang around a certain type of, I'm usually around high performance coaches, and they have a certain mentality about coaching, but that might not be all to coaching. So it was really cool to kind of go through that and kind of give each other feedback back and forth. And also there's a lot of value in it. So it was really cool. That's a good win for me.
Awesome. So a win for me, and I'll keep the same theme. So I had a conversation yesterday with a therapist in another state in the US here. And we connected because she commented something on a Facebook post in a group that I'm also a part of. And so I just messaged back and I said, I just kind of commiserated with her a little bit. My background is in mental health. She's in mental health and she's looking at transitioning out. Her message to me was something to the effect of, my soul is getting sucked out of me. I could not ignore that. Like, that's pretty intense language. So I had a conversation with her yesterday, just kind of helping her see what she's doing now and where she wants to go. And the coolest part, I don't tell people what to do. That's not my thing. I pivoted out of mental health as a psychologist into coaching, but just how I did it doesn't necessarily mean that's how other people should do it. And told her that, this was my experience. But through some of the questions I asked and some of the conversation we had, she got to the point where she's like, I feel so good right now. You just gave me, she interpreted that I gave her permission to kind of make this scary jump that she has been super nervous and super afraid to make, she identified that imposter syndrome. And so anyway, so just having that conversation with her where she visibly was lighter by the end of it and was like, okay, I've kind of got some thoughts and some decisions to make. And so that, I think that gave her a lot of, she used the word freedom. So anyway, that was a great conversation.
That's awesome.
It's not my typical conversation with clients, but it's the same effect, right? It's being able to help somebody free up themselves emotionally, kind of see a clearer path forward in their future, regain some excitement and sense of control. So
that was really cool. And by the way, the thing that you mentioned, that I'm not the kind of person who likes to tell people what to do. I think just that makes you a great coach, little on all the other things that you did, sharing, being vulnerable and sharing your path and helping her think through it. And at the end, I think the result speaks for itself, is that lightness, that freedom is powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you, Faisal, for that compliment.
You're welcome.
So before we jump into the even more in depth into what is it like to shift into coaching, is this for you? What would you need to think about? What skills would you need to think or competencies do you need to think about developing, if any new? I mean, there's just so many questions. So honestly, hopefully this conversation that we're going to have will raise even more questions for you, because these are questions that you'll want to consider and be thoughtful about. But first, we are going to recognize our amazing sponsor for this podcast. It's the Coaching Mastery Community. It is a virtual community of amazing coaches who are on fire to set the world on fire in a positive way. And so we get to
Not in an arsenal.
no, not in an arsenal way. Kind of like entrepreneurs on fire, you know. I don't know if you ever listened to that podcast. I listened to that podcast religiously for years and years and years. So Coaches on Fire, but I feel like that might be taken. So that's why we went with Coach's Journey. Anyway, I digress. The CMC is really an amazing community that both Faisal and I are part of. It is one of the single reasons that we have persisted in coaching despite feeling overwhelmed, despite feeling lost or not sure of kind of the next steps at time. It's really been an amazing, and honestly, part of the conversation that I had with this therapist yesterday, because I didn't know this on the front end of our call, but toward the end of our call, she kind of disclosed that she had this perspective that there was an expectation that she would hire like a guru to help her transition into coaching. And I'm like, I said, first of all, I am not that guru. Like I do not hang a shingle out saying that I'm going to help therapists become coaches and I will coach you for X amount of money. Like that's just not kind of my niche. And so when I told her, I said, honestly, I wouldn't recommend you do that, largely because so many people say that they will help coaches, you know, grow into like $1 million coach in 5 weeks. But the challenge is, how do you know that that's actually going to happen, or that they have enough of their own experience and credibility if you've never heard of them? And so I said, I think the value play for her is to join a community, because she gets exposed to lots of different ways in which people have shifted into coaching, in the way that people run their practice and do all these different things. So she gets to see more, she gets to mastermind with people and figure out kind of what her strategy is going to be. And when I talked to her about like a community, like totally the light bulb went off and she's like, oh, I totally agree with that. Like she didn't know that that existed, but letting her know that that kind of thing does exist, especially with the CMC, she was so excited. She's like, that makes perfect sense. That is so aligned with how I think and how I grow. So she was super, super excited about it. So anyway, I mean, the CMC from my perspective, just after that conversation, it's about masterminding with a group of coaches that are all pretty different. And so we get to pick and choose what makes sense for us and what we want to try. And, you know, you're not locked into paying, you know, 25 grand to a single coach that you don't really know if they're going to fit your style or not. So that was a really long-winded plug for CMC, but it was just interesting how that conversation with her landed. You know how you have those conversations and you don't really know where you're going to go with it. You just kind of intuitively say stuff. Yeah. And then at the end, it's like, oh, wow, that's exactly what she needed to hear.
Yeah. Oh, I think that was a great story.
Do you have anything to add to that, Faisal? I know sometimes you lack words. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I know it's like constantly run out of them. No, I think the way you shared it was really powerful, because I mean, at the end of the day, especially coaches who are thinking about it or starting out initially, even if they're certified as a coach, we underestimate how complex getting into a new world is. And especially one of the biggest things for me in my experience has been is that we don't have a frame of reference yet. So how do you know what's working and what's not, even if you're trying different things? Yeah. And this is where a community comes, where you get feedback from outside of your head and what you're doing, and kind of understanding, oh, well, this is good and this is positive, this is negative. and or at least have something beyond what you have in your own subjective experience that will help you move forward.
Yeah.
That can do wonders for any human being, and for coaches specifically, because this path is like, it's, the coaching world is so open right now that they're literally, it's like a no man's land. Everybody will go anywhere, and it's in the process of becoming an industry. And this is why I love sharing this with coaches who are new, who are getting better and better, and who are scaling. Is like, we're the pioneers of this industry.
Yeah.
Whatever we do will set the foundation, and at some point it's going to get standardized, regulated, whatever. But we get to set that. To me, that's very exciting. And the only way to do that, I think, is to be around other people who are doing similar things, and build it together.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, sorry, my mind, when you said like we're pioneering the way, I was picturing you wearing a little pilgrim hat.
I like that. We're the pilgrims of coaching world.
Right? And then my brain was like, oh, Pilgrim's Progress, trying, that story. I think it's an allegory. Anyway, so my mind was going all over the place as you were talking.
I like that. Sherry's creative mind is engaged. I like it.
Yes, it is engaged. It's totally engaged. All right. So future coaches, or newbie coaches, or coaches that have been doing this a while and maybe are thinking about expanding your practice into including some new aspects, like maybe group therapy or creating a membership. If you typically the way that you function is just working one-on-one individually, maybe by package or something like that. Lots of things to think about. But maybe let's start all the way at the beginning, Faisal. When we put ourselves in the position, however many years ago, that we were like, maybe we want to do coaching. Maybe Faisal wants to become a coach rather than engineer. Maybe Dr. Sherry wants to pivot into coaching and out of the traditional mental health world. What were some of the things that you kind of reflecting on that you remember having to decisions to make and kind of things to figure out?
Well, first of all, I didn't know what coaching was before I got into it. And I didn't know it as a thing. I think you have a similar perspective on that. But how it started was that I had done a lot of work, and I think this is generally the case with most coaches that I've connected to, is that I went through a period of struggle, and I had to figure out how to deal with it, and I had to do a lot of work around there. And over time, as I developed certain competencies to deal with my own inner struggle and outer struggle, kind of what happened naturally was that I was able to pass that on to other people around me without being conscious of it. Like in one of the incidences, I've shared this before with one of my closest friends, and he went through this period where he got fired from his job a couple of times. This is the second time. He didn't know what was going on, and he was very down. And I just went and talked to him for a day, and he's like, I don't know what you did, but that completely changed my perspective on it. I'm like, I don't know what I did. And so it's like, ooh, magic. And then it wasn't until I actually kind of pushed myself out of my comfort zone, or more accurately, Brennan Burchard. I watched one of his videos. When I watched him, like, even then I wasn't thinking of him as a coach. He was just a trainer. He was talking about, you can share anything that you might be good at. I didn't even know what I was good at. I was like, okay, well, there has to be something I'm good at. It's remotely possible. At that time, my self-perception was broken quite a bit, but there was just a hint that I have to have something that adds value to the world. And then I went to Experts Academy, and then that's where Brennan Burchard talked about coaching. I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's a thing. And I was kind of creating these vague ideas about more initially I was thinking about training than coaching. but then as I got into the world, there was this whole other world that I got to explore. And even as I started out, it was exciting to go towards this stuff and talk to all these people who were open to similar things as I was. It was just one of the most exciting things, watching people from 47 or so different countries coming and wanting to make some kind of difference.
Yeah. Or
sharing their gifts or whatever it might be. But in the meantime, as I went through this process of getting certified, as exciting as it was, and I always share this, coming home, sitting in front of my computer, looking at it, oh shit, this is a lot harder than I thought. I don't know what to do. And then I started doing a bunch of stuff. I pretty much did everything I was taught to do. But I didn't know, like I said before, I didn't know what was working and what was not. Yeah. And because I was so anxious, because I didn't have a frame of reference, I didn't have any guidance, and I didn't have a community, I kept jumping from one thing to the next thing. And even in my coaching practice and the way that I did sessions, it was the same. Like I would use something and I'd be like, oh, that's not working. And I wouldn't stay long enough with something to know whether or not it's working.
Right.
But it wasn't until I got connected to a community, I started realizing, oh, there might be something to this. Let's explore it further.
Yeah, sometimes I think we get easy to throw out something that we think is not working when maybe we were using it with the wrong person at the wrong time, or there's something that needs to get tweaked. I've noticed that for me, that sometimes I'm just like, it's not working. But yeah, you get that external perspective from somebody that maybe has done it, used it before, or knows more about it. And you're like, oh, that was actually a really good strategy. It was the wrong time or the wrong person or whatever. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So that was generally like how it started. And I want to hear from you, Sherry, because you have a different take on this, you coming from the mental health world.
Yeah. As you were talking, I like metaphors, so I try to come up with as many as I can. And obviously imagery, because, I'm still picturing you in a pilgrim hat.
Cool. I'm picturing myself too now.
Yeah. So it was almost like you, Faisal, came into the coaching world with a tool belt, but no tools. I came into the coaching world with a tool belt full of tools already, but I didn't know if they were the right tools. Like if I don't want to use the hammer if I'm really supposed to be using the Phillips screwdriver. Like I just wasn't clear. And so for me, it was trying to understand my frame of reference that I had with the world and how to help people in the mental health, kind of deconstruct that a little bit, decide intentionally what parts of that framework and what skill sets I had already developed and competencies that I could use in the coaching world, but how would it look different? Because one of the challenges that I was told, kind of was introduced to me, is that there can be a lot of legal liability if the two things get blended, if mental health gets blended in with coaching, and it's, they just kind of flow into each other, because the mental health world is very regulated. I have a license. I have some very specific ethics to uphold, which I'm all about ethics. Like that's a critical piece of what we do in any industry. You must have ethics, in my opinion, like, rules around which you treat people, and, values around how, making sure that we're not putting our own values and self-service above other people, those sorts of things. But I disagreed with a lot of the rules around how you actually execute on those ethics, or, they would say you must do this with the implication that if you don't, you are being unethical. And some of those things I completely disagreed with. And so I felt very constrained, at kind of the more that I worked in the mental health field. And I've had my license as a psychologist since 2007. So we're like on year 14 now. And I actively used it for over 10 years. And so I kind of wasn't new in the field, but I was getting to the point where I was like, the impact that I feel like I can have on the world, how I want to be present with my clients, just wasn't really a great fit for the mental health world, and with kind of where it was shifting, especially, I won't get in the weeds on this, but especially with the insurance-based medical model of mental health, you have to give a diagnosis. And so then there just became a game of like, well, which is the least destructive diagnosis I can give? And if you're in the mental health field, y'all know what an adjustment disorder is, because that's what you end up using. So it got to be this game that I just didn't really want to play. And I am totally winding all over as I'm sharing this story. So I'm kind of just free forming here, guys. And okay, so back to pivoting into coaching, like I really needed to decide how I was going to be different as a coach. And honestly, I made the decision. I'm like, I'm going to do coaching. I had already done some, what I would call executive coaching. I had worked with some entrepreneurs and business owners locally, because through the journey as a psychologist and creating a practice and hiring a bunch of therapists, I worked on myself as a leader and read a bunch of books. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know so many leaders that don't know this stuff. And so I started doing some leadership classes locally. And so I kind of worked myself into, being like a leadership coach. But I found with one particular client, I felt completely inadequate in my ability to help him, because he is a very successful entrepreneur, owns a business in town, was doing great, always the top of his game, always got international awards. And I got to a point where I'm like, I have no idea how to help him be even more amazing. My training as a psychologist did not give me the skill set or the frame of reference to continue to help him. So that was the moment. I remember sitting in his office. I can just picture it in my mind's eye. I was sitting in his office. He was on one side of his desk. I was on the other. He was sharing something with me, and I'm sitting there listening to him. But inside, I was like, oh crap. I kind of feel like I'm wasting his time right now, because I have no earthly idea where to take him. So it was that moment in time where I'm like, I need a framework. I need some new competencies. I had and still have a lot of things that I bring into coaching that I've been doing for the last 15 years. But there was a frame of reference, the way that I viewed the world, the way that I viewed people, that I needed a refresh on that was going to be helpful for my new focus, my new clientele. So for me, that's what it was. Going back to the tool belt reference, I had a lot of tools already, and I still do, but I wasn't sure which tool to use when. And I knew for darn certain that there were some tools that I was missing, especially those laser levels. Like, those things are amazing. You push the little button and they, I needed some laser levels in my life, and I didn't have any. So anyway, so that was kind of my experience getting into coaching. And so even though I have a PhD, I was in 10 years of college and master's level and PhD. I went back and got a certification because I recognized the gap in knowledge that I had. Whereas honestly, I would say most of the therapists and other folk, well, particularly therapists, I tend to have more of these conversations with therapists because they ask me, because they're intrigued. Most therapists, I don't think, need to get any additional certification or training to make the jump. Now, they may find themselves at a point where they're like, oh, I'm seeing a gap in my knowledge and my ability to help. And Faisal, we've talked about that. It's called just-in-time learning. Use what you have as far as it will take you. And then at the moment that you start to see a gap or a discrepancy in where you want to be and where you are, then take action. A lot of times what I hear people do is they're trying to predict okay, well, this is what I'll need next year. So I'm just going to get that done now. But then they end up wasting time and money. And then they get to next year and they realize, oh, like I've shifted my business model by now, and I actually didn't really need what I did last year. So that was a waste. So anyway, that's, I think a lot of people already have the skills that they need to get started. That's kind of the point of that.
Well, I love your story, and some things that really jump out is that your courage to recognize where you need support in. And like, that's not especially if you've gone through so much education in a specific field, you're like, oh, I need more. And then recognizing that, and also there's that ethics piece that comes into it, is like actually being honest with yourself, which I think is one of the hardest forms of honesty, is being honest with ourselves to say that, hey, I don't know if I can help this person. Am I wasting this person's time? But then actually being open and curious to shifting your own perspective, like that takes an immense amount of intelligence, wisdom, and courage. So I wanted to honor you on that.
Thank you.
Part. And as you were talking about therapists and psychologists, what came to mind, like they did such a good job that I find most of my clients are self-diagnosing themselves. I constantly hear, apparently everybody's got ADHD, ADD, bipolar disorder, multiple personality disorder, all sorts of things. And then I almost always have to ask them, like, they will say it with that confidence, like, I have ADHD. Like, were you diagnosed? Like, no. I'm like, where did you get that diagnosis? Like, well, I think I have ADHD. I'm like, okay, let's put a pause on that before you diagnose yourself. So they've done a very good job.
Well, and I don't think it's just the mental health field either, because, you know, I think, there is such a culture around self-diagnosis. And it's interesting because there's a gentleman who came out with this little book. He's like kind of like a business consultant, and the book title that he came out with is The Entrepreneurial Personality Type, which is clearly not a is not one of the personality diagnoses in the DSM. But it's interesting because he outlines some of the similar personality characteristics that a lot of entrepreneurs have. And you know, and part of it is being distractible, and but not distractible like where you don't get stuff done, but you're the way that I perceive it is that your vision is so expansive and so big picture that it's hard to dial in to stick with like the one thing for a bit to get traction on it, you know. And so when people say, yeah, I have a hard time focusing, immediately they're like, yep, I got ADD or ADHD. And it's like, no, you don't.
Agreed. And there's, and I think especially in this day and age that entrepreneurial personality type is increasing more and more because the opportunities have exploded. Like we find more and more kids are building like 7-6-figure businesses out of YouTube channels and all sorts of things that they're able to promote on Instagram and everywhere else. Like that wasn't possible a few decades ago. Just our technology is expanding, information is becoming like it's everywhere. So it's expanding people's perspective, but in the meantime there's so much in there. What are you going to focus on? And so especially those people who are open to creating a bigger vision, it's actually one of the hardest things to dial it down. That's one of the reasons I found more and more, one of the things that I focused on for myself and for my clients is focusing on their vision and their goals. If you're not clear about that, almost everything you're going to do is just jumping from one thing to another, and you won't stick long enough with something to build it out. So aside from that, as you were sharing this, so going back to your tool belt analogy, so I'll make it more exciting. So you had a tool belt with a lot of tools. I had a tool belt with a lot of invisible tools that I didn't know existed. I'll go into the sci-fi territory until they became visible to me. And this is what I think it will connect to, because we can look at it in two ways. Because a lot of times, many of us come from the education, academic world, and we associate competency mostly with that world, and which comes down to like your IQ points and all that stuff. So unless we have some kind of official training or degree or diploma, we don't give ourselves a lot of credit. And as you were describing that therapist, is that because she's so used to that, and if she tries to go into something without that, it creates, oh, well, can I do that?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very high value placed on degrees and all that stuff, which to an extent I think is important, because that information, knowledge is important for people to get it. But as we all know, the way the world has shifted is very different. For example, Google doesn't require degrees anymore. And Elon Musk has openly talked about, like, I don't require degrees for people to come in. I just want their competency.
Yeah.
I want people who are determined. So, and the same thing I think with Amazon is going towards it. Like, all these bigger companies are understanding that there are a lot of people who are absorbing the information or applying it in their life.
Yeah.
And that's outside of the school system. And they're recognizing there's a lot of talent out there. Yeah. And so understanding where we're at in history, we're not in a place where the only place you get education is school. That's a part of it, and that's an important part if you want to go towards it. But people are learning all over the place. And it's not just learning for the sake of learning information, but people are applying it. People are building machines. People are creating frameworks. People are helping other people with information that they've self-taught themselves. It's not like they're self-taught, but there's a lot of teachers and information out there. So there's a bit of unlearning that needs to happen in there to kind of trust yourself that you have gained a certain amount of experience, knowledge or wisdom beyond the school system or beyond something that you're taught.
Yeah. And so I think that's the challenge for those of you that are, thinking about getting into coaching is, I think from my perspective, there's two ways to approach shifting into coaching, as far as like, who are you going to serve and what are you going to do? I think the first is very much with kind of what you're talking about, Faisal, and that is an honest assessment of what is the value that you can bring to a coachee. And some of that value is going to be your life experience. Some of that value is going to come from formal education, things that you've learned, but there's also value of things that you just that are part of who you are or how you see the world. Another coach that I talked to recently, she said, I just have had this natural ability to develop really deep, meaningful relationships most of my life. And so that's part of what she then does as a coach, is she helps people really develop out their relationships, whether it's romantic or, familial or friendships or whatever. And so that's amazing that she was able to recognize that is kind of her superpower. She was never taught that. She naturally had that ability as a child. And so, but sometimes we don't recognize how we are gifted because we see it as, well, everybody must have that gift. Like, I'm just normal. There's nothing special about how I interact with people. And so, so if you're not really sure what your superpower is, I think asking friends and family, hey, what is it about me that's you think is a little bit unique, or, how have you seen me be able to help somebody else that maybe you thought was really cool or surprising, or, ask people, because I think that's a really great way of getting even more information about ourselves that we can then intentionally use as a coach. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly what I was going to share. And in my experience, one of the most, and just, I want to share that everything that you've done will have an application in coaching. I'm not just talking like whether it's academics, it doesn't matter what. I came from an engineering field, and I can tell you that if it wasn't for not the specific material, but the way of thinking that I learned, I wouldn't be as good as a coach. So that actually applied quite a bit for me in my coaching, because I follow a process without even realizing it, because my brain is trained to look at design and different components, how they interact with each other. And but the other part of it is there are other things that I never thought would help me so much in coaching. One of those things was the work that I've done on the emotional end to really deal, because I had a huge challenge around that. Just like you mentioned that about the coach creating deep, meaningful relationships with people. With me, it was processing my emotions have been one of the hardest things. To this day, I find it hard. On average, it's much harder for me to process. So I've had to find better and better ways of doing it. And that's why I related very quickly with somebody like Jim Quick when he talked about, like, he teaches people how to learn, and he talks about the irony of it is the thing that I teach people do is learning, and that's the thing that I always have trouble with. And it's not just, and he teaches about learning, and that's the thing that he had such a hard time with. So like something like that, I'm able to help my clients process those better now. But not process in terms of like therapy, but more in terms of looking at things from different angles and perspectives that they might not have thought of, right. Getting them to think deeper about it, the value of it, getting them to experience it. But something as simple, like I never thought that would, but when I think back to the testimonials that my clients give me, is that they get this sense of authenticity and deepness about themselves because they're able to explore that side. They don't know that they're doing that, but I know that that's what's happening. And then there are other things that has been part of my life experience, the interest that I have, for example, in mythology and religion comes into my coaching almost always. The interest I have in something as simple as science fiction movies comes into my coaching. Like I literally had a session a few weeks ago was on leadership. It was one of the sessions in my leadership framework, and the whole session was about the Marvels. Like if you wanted to, like, it was about Marvel characters, and then that was one of the favorite sessions my client has had, and he's been with me for over a year. He's like, that really helped me see things more clearly about what my leadership model looks like, and I related it back to Captain America. It's like you wouldn't, like, if I didn't have that deep interest in the archetypes and mythology, and also connecting that with the superhero movies, I wouldn't be able to do that. And I do that often. And it's very much more of a clear picture than some vague thing. So like almost everything that you are and have learned, you can bring it to some degree. But the things that you love the most, the things that you enjoy, the things that you're interested in growing towards, those are the things more than likely will become your specialties in a sense.
Right. I think there's this feedback loop that I think is important to understand and look for. And as we develop as a coach, especially as you jump into coaching, you know, you think you're going to be like, you as a coach are going to look this way. And then you act and you are a coach out of that identity. And then, you know, as you said, Faisal, you started to get feedback from people about maybe how you impacted them in a way that you didn't recognize or you didn't anticipate. So then there's feedback there. You just got some information, which then you can use to inform how you intentionally show up with the next people, as well as how you market. And you know, I think that's a huge like pill to swallow as a new coach. Like, how do I get clients? How do I I personally think it's super important. You know, you can't really throw a stick without hitting a coach right now in the world. But by no means is every coach a good coach. I think the downside of the lack of regulation is that there are a lot of coaches that aren't really that great and maybe not worth the money. However, if you're listening to this podcast, I am confident that is not you, because you are here to learn and grow. And so you are trying to be, better yourself every day, which completely applaud you for. That's amazing. And so how do you find, clients? And part of that process is really getting a very clear understanding of who you are as a human and how you show up as a coach. And then how you as a human and your skill set and your competencies then impact your client, because that outcome that your client gets is ultimately, a lot of then what you are able to use as your marketing. So it all ties together, but it's a process that reveals itself as you go. Like, I don't really know very many coaches I don't know that I know any coaches that literally started their coaching journey already having 100% clarity on who they are as a coach and their identity and what they have to offer, that didn't change and grow and expand or get refined over time. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed at that process, I think that's perfectly normal. And just dive into the deep end of the pool and you will figure it out. Like, you'll learn how to swim, especially if there's people around you that are able to hold you up long enough to get that next breath and to help you be like, okay, this is how you doggy paddle. Like, it will come, but it's super scary. It takes a lot of courage. But it's a journey and process that I think just is part of the process.
Yeah, and it is. I love that, and the overwhelm is normal because you're just like, there's so much, and this is something. So this is something I had to make sense of when I'm like, okay, there's a reason why we go through schooling for a while, because there's a lot in there as well. As much as they're shove a bunch of stuff that might not apply, but there is still a lot in there to learn and process and apply. So it takes a bit of time. And then after that, after you finish your schooling, you go into an apprentice position, or you're working under somebody who has experience. And in the engineering world, you have to work under a professional engineer for at least 3 years before you can apply for your licensing and all that stuff. So when I got into coaching, especially as I went through certification, it didn't take very long. It took about a week. I'm like, that can't be right. It's not going to make me a great coach. Like, I was trying to make sense of it, but then it actually made sense more as I got into it. And it reminded me of what Brandon Burchard said, is like, this is one of those careers where you're going to learn on the job. So you have some basic competencies, but then you're going to learn a lot if you have the right mindset around it. And I would say one of the things that has helped me a lot, for me personally, I've seen other coaches who are good, is experimentation. Mm-hmm. Being open to experiment and not feeling like you're going to mess something up is very crucial. Because if you, and this is the case with almost anything, like it's something as simple as playing an instrument. If you're constantly worried about you're going to do something wrong, you're not going to try it. Yeah. You're not going to try to explore it. And the same thing with coaching is that you need to be open to explore different aspects of it. And then there are certification is like part of it. Getting training is part of it. But you can learn on your own as well. Go look up coaching videos from Rich Litvin or Brandon Burchard or whoever. And go read some books on coaching, The Prosperous Coach, the Book of Coaching, the Business Book of Coaching, leadership books. It will give you the basic competencies. You might have to organize it if you're not going through a framework, but you can make sense of it as you go through it. Yeah. And so there's a distinction I want to make here. And I always say this, that this is one of those professions where you need to be passionate about this. There's a lot in there, and I'll not serious. I don't like the term serious as much. I like to make the distinction that Alan Watts made, a philosopher who said that. Sort of being serious about what you're doing, be sincere. Ask yourself, are you in this for the long haul? Because there is a lot of work to be done here. It's a bit of a journey and adventure, which means that you kind of buckle up and you're like, I need to do the daily work. Which part of it is learning. Yeah, buckle up, buttercup. Part of it is the learning, but the other part of it is in the coaching world. It's not one of those worlds where you get to learn something conceptual and teach people. That's in the training world. Yes. In the coaching world, you need to model a lot of things. Yeah. So you need to have tried things, which means you need to have shown courage. And for yourself, whatever courage means to you, you need to have taken risk in life. You need to have dive deeper than what you know of surface about yourself. You need to have tried to connect people at different levels. You need to have some aspect of leadership in you, self-leadership or otherwise. Yeah. Like these things, if you don't have it internally, like if you don't apply it, concepts don't work in coaching unless they're applied. Because coaching is not about, I'll quote Brandon Burchard, like he said that I don't get paid for teaching people stuff. I get paid for getting people results.
Yeah.
That's a very different world.
Very different world. So we are going to be wrapping up this conversation here. And, there's a whole lot that we can talk about, that needs to be talked about, that needs to be decided on for those that are wanting to jump into coaching. We just touched the surface, kind of like an iceberg. We just touched the surface on, what are some of the things that you think about who you are and how you want to impact the world. And then, as you start to dial in some of your competencies and some of the ways in which you gifts that you have and the ways that you want to impact people. We haven't even started to then talk about, well, what does that look like, practically speaking? Do you have experience, we're speaking to larger groups and, delivering larger messages? Because if you have that experience already, when you think about how that translates into the coaching world, maybe you want to jump into doing, some classes or trainings or group coaching or, some larger scale stuff that somebody that doesn't really have that experience with one-to-many might be totally freaked out by and not feel ready to do that or have any desire to do that. So there's some really interesting ways in which you can continue to cultivate your past experience and the ways that you know that you are good at things in the coaching world when you think about how you're going to structure your practice and what that delivery looks like.
Yeah. And then I just want to summarize, like if I was a coach starting out, whether I'm thinking about it or I've started out, I would focus on like a few things. One, I'll this is the thing that helped me more than anything else was coach, and coach. And it's a quote from The Prosperous Coach in the book. And when I saw that, I'm like, that has to be my focus. If you don't get experience in it, if you don't get feedback, you won't be in the game long enough.
Yeah.
For you to know where your niche is, where you need to get better, where you need to improve, all that stuff. But definitely find somebody to coach. A starting point might be somebody around you, or get in touch with all sorts of free communities everywhere where there are coaches. Coach them, get feedback, or find some volunteers in your community with your colleagues or whoever that might be, and join either a community or be in touch with multiple coaches.
Yeah.
I love the idea of community because that excelled what I do by far more than anything else. And consistently, this goes without saying, I think most coaches are readers, but start gaining information, not just about personal development, but coaching competencies, such as the books that I mentioned, and leadership competencies to know how people can move forward, and start applying some of those things in your own life. Because as Jason Goldberg might say, that there's only one form of leadership, it's self-leadership. If you can do that, then you can slowly start to translate that with others too. So just a few of these things, if you do that consistently, your coaching will pick up.
Absolutely. Yeah. So to wrap up, I'm going to use another analogy. Going with like a single source of knowledge. So Faisal, if you were to say, I help coaches, hit 6 figures in 5 weeks, and I will help you too, and I sign up with you, you're giving me a recipe. It may or may not work. Like, I don't know in advance if it's a bread recipe, is the stinking bread really going to rise, or is it going to be like a rock hard lump that I will not end up wanting to eat? But when you get part of a community, it's like being in a kitchen where lots of people are making lots of different recipes, because you can learn like, ooh, I've never used that kind of vegetable. I've never used that kind of spice. Like, ooh, I love how they pair these things together. You get the value and the benefit of being able to see how lots of people do things. And so you get to build your own unique, amazing recipe based on, the combination of what you get to experience. And so, honestly, the CMC, the Coaching Mastery community, is just a wonderful place for that. And just to kind of make it clear, the coaching mastery community has a coaching chain, which the sole purpose, or the main purpose rather, is as a coach, I get to experiment, I get to practice coaching, but not just on a client, because I've asked clients for feedback before, and the conversation that usually goes, wow, it was really good session. Like, thank you for that epiphany or whatever. Well, that feels good, but I know that it wasn't a perfect session. Like, there's things I could have done to make it even more powerful, or maybe I missed something. They dropped a nugget and then I completely ignored it and went somewhere else. But those are the kind of things that I actually get from a coach when we have a structured feedback, where they're like, yeah, I said this thing, but then you kind of didn't pursue it and we went somewhere else. I mean, I get so much better feedback so that I can level up and improve my skill set quicker. So that coach is important, but just kind of wanted to put that in the framework that when you do that, that it can be even more powerful when you're doing it with a coach who is going to give you that powerful feedback. So,
especially if there are coaches from different modalities.
Yes.
That you get to see and experience different types of coaching, not just one form of coaching.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any words of wisdom you want to wrap up with, Faisal?
Yeah, and I just want to say that there's probably a reason why you're here and listening to this. And I think if you've sat through this long and listened to us, there's more than likely something deep within you. There's a calling, and notice that intuition. And all I can say is you got this. It'll take a little bit of time, but you can do this. Yeah.
There's a gal that I know, she literally said, I have been thinking about coaching for 20 years. And she just now in the last 2 weeks took the jump. Don't be like her. I love you, Gay. You're amazing. I'm so excited about this journey, but don't be like her in that way. Like, if you have this thought, this desire, jump on it. Have the courage to act, but get the people around you that can help support you, because it is a long journey, but one that is well worth it.
Yeah. And also your service is needed more than ever.
Yeah.
More than ever. So it's not actually about you. It's about how you can contribute in the world.
Yeah. Well, Faisal, thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts and wisdom with us today.
And thank you for sharing.
You are welcome. So we look forward to seeing you guys on our next episode. Every episode is full of surprises and interesting conversation and guests and all sorts of things. But the purpose of the Coach's Journey podcast is to help coaches be encouraged and supported on their journey as a coach, because it is not an easy journey. It is one riddled with lots of painful self-development and stumbling blocks that are just going to be there. But we are here to support you, and we applaud you on the journey.
Yes. Yeah, and you got this.
You got this. Bye.
You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast.